So good evening. Wow, what a crowd. I'm really happy you're all here, and I'm really proud to introduce you to Ilse Crawford Oscar Peña. The curators of this exhibition, Hope, there's a very hopeful message in it that we even small steps can lead to very big changes. And I think we need it. We all think we need change in this world. And I'm very hopeful we will have change. And yeah, thank you so much for doing this, for giving us the exhibition. Thank you also to our team and of course to Bureau Ballen, who did the exhibition design, to Anne and Matt for producing it. And I hope that you will all enjoy the exhibition and get hope from it as well, as much as I do. So now we will have a talk, and yeah, please come up to the stage. Axel is going to do the talk, so lead the talk. He's actually one of the first people from Kazerne, from the very first Kazerne we had, and I'm proud you're having your graduation and you're working as a designer now. So welcome in the real world. Yeah, and I'm very curious about what you have to ask. So later on, you all will have the opportunity to ask some questions as well. To me, it's really nice to see and hear the people from the Innovation Cafe we have every Thursday, as well as a lot of designers and the design community. So please mingle afterwards, because I think you need each other. Thank you.
I just want to add, and also thank you so much to all the designers who have participated. Yeah, thank you really, because I know it's quite an effort to get your things here, and I'm so happy that you've joined behind this story. So, thank you.
Welcome everybody. Thank you, Annemoon, for the good introduction. I would like to welcome you who are visiting, you who are exhibiting, but I also would like to welcome Hope tonight in the room. I have not been a student of Ilse Crawford and Oscar Peña. Most of the works here are made by students from that, like past students. So my questions are also as somebody who does not yet necessarily know everything there is to know about you. So some question would be maybe a bit naive.
Will take a long time.
So therefore it felt also a bit weird to introduce you as somebody who doesn't know you very well. So maybe I thought, could you maybe introduce yourself and tell us how did you end up here? Take us a little bit through your path as a designer yourself.
Long story short, crazy parents, and we made everything at home. We didn't buy it. I was brought up that side of the line, you know. When there was no money, we made crazy jellies, and actually it seemed to be a lot more fun. And our house seemed to have a lot more people in it than some of the more formal houses of friends. So I grew up really with that in my head, that things are possible, that you make your life, and that life is ultimately about bringing people together. I was a journalist. I then moved into the practice of design completely by accident. I worked in New York working on product. And that was when Lee asked me to start the department, because I was fascinated around the idea of how spaces, how products can make life better for the maker, for the user, for the system, actually, because I understood the system, having been inside the system. And that was when I was asked to come to Eindhoven. What I discovered was, in fact, that it wasn't Liedewij who asked me, but actually Oscar. And, you know...
Actually, I recommended Ilse, but I didn't know Ilse.
Yeah, and audience, I married him. So, and it's been 20 years, and I have been running Man and Wellbeing, and also running a studio in London, which is based largely on interiors, but with some product, based on the idea of basically spaces that make us better humans. And Oscar has been working separately, and he will explain in a minute, but now works with me.
So I'm actually first I'm Colombian, and then I'm a designer. I came to Holland in 1987 from after a few years in the US. I was always fascinated about making things, which maybe that comes from my father. I think my father never studied design, but he was a great maker from electrical things, bingo machines, and then he ended up doing boats and hospital boats and working for oil companies, doing maintenance. So he was quite, for me, a kind of great inspiration. Then I came to Holland to work for Philips. See how some of our good, not just colleagues, but very good friends here in the audience. I spent 28 years working in different divisions, from the kitchen appliance in Groningen, in Eindhoven in consumer electronics, and my last years were in lighting. At the same time, in 1996, I was asked by Jan Blukensen and Frans van Dupen, Jan van Dupen, to become head of, at that time was called Man and Work, my department. And I always told, my first thing was, I want less work, more man. And the team became a kind of man and interactivity, something like that, and then became, for the last 15 years, man and activity. And so it was kind of I live in Eindhoven and Groningen, then I went to Milan for a few years with Philips. Then that's when I recommended Ilse, and finally she took the post. and then I moved back we decided to be together. We moved back to London, and then I did like a 10-year kind of commute between London and Eindhoven while working, and also being head of the Design Academy of the Man and Activity Department.
And I think between us, we were just doing a quick math, and it's probably wildly inaccurate, but I think we probably guided.
I would say 1,000 graduates.
Between us, maybe more. I think it might be more.
More, yeah.
I think it's somewhere closer
over
to
the course of 20 years.
20, if you do 20, yeah. I did 23, and it was 20, so it's 43 years, average of 35 students per year. You can multiply, it becomes 1,200 roughly.
So, okay, so you have been in the field working really, really long. The project, that's longer than most of us, and definitely longer than the projects that we see here today. Like, they're very recent work. I think most of them are max 5 years old. Why is that? Why?
No logic.
Okay.
I have to say. I think that it was an exhibition that came about after several glasses of wine, and Annemoon said, why not? Let's do something. And we had to do it. The caveat was we had to pull it together very, very quickly. And I think that the idea of hope is a very, very important one for our times. And so in order to gather together projects that would express that strongly, they probably A, needed to be more recent, but also, more importantly, B, needed to be available. So I think that defined it. But having said that, and seeing the show, which I think is, if you like, a sample, just a sample of the number of graduates who have been through the departments, I would love to do a bigger show. I'd love to see it as a sketch or something that could be bigger somewhere else.
Yeah, I think hope can be infinite, so we just have to kind of make sure that we also the space, how many, maybe we could have maybe 20, 25 projects each, and it's just the kind of practical thing. Maybe the things that that remember the most and most recent. So, oh, that's a nice project to have in there, and also remember a lot of these things are just kind of ideas that are translated, so that in some way they're quite fragile. Maybe strong in content, but maybe still fragile in the visualization that they have. So maybe that's maybe that was. It's not that we planned it that way, but maybe that was something that we it comes as a reality. Things that are available. That maybe probably if you get people from 10 years ago, 15 years, maybe some of those things don't exist, unless they have become a product or. So just kind of a
graduate projects often end up in the mother's attic.
So about the exhibition, you divided hope into 3 themes: local authority, careful tech, and being well. Why those 3? How are they? Related?
I think I was just trying to. I always believe that design is about communication and trying to see how can people navigate, because otherwise, especially this is a topic that comes to us as being heads always when there's the Design Academy exhibition. Is we have remarks, oh, it was so difficult to navigate, you never knew what it was, which product belongs to, is it one department or is it a team, or so we're trying to kind of maybe group in some way, so maybe people, so there can be a little relationship, and maybe people can understand why the project belongs in that category. But I believe today also the boundaries of design are very kind of blurring, and in some ways it's similar to what the departments in the Design Academy. I think we have these departments just to give a sense of maybe that people can belong to something, but the boundaries are very, very, I would say, flexible, right. Blurring. It's not that they're so, I would say, specific.
But I think the topics specifically are ones that interest us very much right now, and I think obviously interest students, otherwise the projects wouldn't be there. But careful technology we felt was actually important, because right now technology, I think, in many people's minds is defined by the business of technology or by the circuits, or whereas actually, obviously, it's an evolutionary science. It's something that builds a bridge to the future. Arguably, one of the most interesting things that we should all be looking at right now is the Impossible Burger. This burger that, to all intents and purposes, is like meat, tastes like meat. I mean, it feels like a strange thing, but even the meat industry in America is frightened of it, because it's so close to something that most people won't be able to tell the difference. And I think those sorts of things are technology. So here we have a number of projects which I think are looking at technology in a very different way, whether it's looking at how things are made, so Isabel's project, the backstory of your Apple iPad, or Teresa Van Dongen's, the backstory of energy. I think it's important that we understand that technology is manifold. And then in this room, normally we have local authority, which is more of a story of facilitating local knowledge, local identity, local resources. So the designer is a facilitator rather than an inventor or researcher. And then finally, being well, projects which are giving people the tools to look after themselves, basically, to take ownership of their own health rather than it being a professionalized, sanitized, medicalized, always, discipline.
Also, maybe, I think, as Ilse mentioned already, it's kind of we see that maybe today the designers can have a different role, and maybe, as Ilse mentioned, in the technology, it could be, I see kind of the designer as a kind of visualizer. He visualizes maybe how technology is taking things apart. So maybe people can understand how things are made, where they come from. I've always been very fascinated by going to factories. And we'll be surprised that maybe here there's a lot of designers and have the opportunity to go to factories, but also 99% of the people in the world, they've never been to a factory. They don't even know how a factory looks like. And in some way, in the technologies, maybe the designer is a visualizer. Maybe here in this one, local is more the designer as a facilitator.
Most of these are not products. I think that's the important thing to say. They are not commercial, final finished things. They're sketches of a new reality. And I think that's where designers have an amazing gift, because they can create this sketch of a better world. I mean, I think Rutger Bregman says that in his Realistic Utopia, that we need to visualize a better world so that we can make the small steps that take us there. But unless you in some way realize or visualize it, it remains in the realm of the abstract. You can't create a movement with an abstract idea. You can create a movement once you start with a rough sketching out of what that is.
So
Maybe-
it reminds me of also of the text of Careful Tech, which says technology is an evolutionary science, not a circuit board, a fascinating catalyst that touches nature, craft, ethics, biology, health, sustainability. You talk a lot about values and about ethics. Looking back on my education that I had as a designer, I don't feel that I have been educated in the direction of like moral philosophy. I've been more educated as a designer, well, skill-wise and everything. So
you mentioned you didn't join our departments.
maybe I should have then. No, but it's like ethics is like it's a big body of scientific knowledge. And well, are there any moral philosophers in the room tonight? No. So
It's a super interesting question. And actually, I think ethics increasingly is, extremely important in everything. I was discussing with a friend of mine who's a banker here in the Netherlands, who works at ABN AMRO, and telling her how I have a pension in the UK, which I got when I was a journalist, company pension. And I do ethical screening on it. I've done ethical screening on it for 10 years, quite a tough ethical screening. She says, here in the Netherlands, you can't do that. Your pension is given to you by a company. You can't screen it. And my screening was crazily off the charts. I mean, I had to decide whether, I was prepared to have anything that touched a mine in Africa. I mean, obviously not. Right through to, did I agree with girly magazines if they were on the top shelf of a newsagent? I mean, but you have to ask yourself those questions in relation to the things you do every day. My dad was an economist, and he always said that every pound's a choice. You put the money into someone's pocket. Whose pocket is that? You have to decide. And I think that's fundamentally an ethical question. And I think it should be at the root of everything: design, finance, consumption, you name it. We obviously can choose where we stand on that bandwidth, but at least we should know the questions that we are actually, by default, answering every day with our behavior.
and how does that work within the field of design? Is there some kind of ethical feedback? Luke?
I think course, when I went to school, I had in my 9th semester, I had a semester of ethics. Maybe if I look at that time, maybe I didn't pay so much attention to it, because my education was kind of very given. You take these courses and that's it. There is no discussion. There are no electives. This is what you do and this is what you follow. Maybe it's very different than what you do today, where you have a lot of choices. But no, if I think about today, I don't know if I really understood it at that time, but it was kind of important to go there. They taught us, how countries work, and then how companies have certain responsibilities, and also what a responsibility you as a designer, the things that you produce, where the materials come from. So it was a very, maybe, again, it was one semester, so, but at least it kind of gave me, some insights, and maybe things that should be maybe consider if I was confronted at some point with someone maybe quite tough decision. Maybe I think when you're a young designer, maybe it's very hard to really understand or trying to
It's very
see.
difficult though today, because I think so much of that is hidden from us. By definition, the system that we're in is fragmented and opaque. So actually to ask those questions is quite hard systemically. And no one says that we can have 100% perfection, of course not, but I think we should start to ask those questions, no question. And we need a system that starts to reinforce that. I think the Dutch media is more tough in that respect, I think, for example, than the British media, which is way too much controlled by Murdoch. But it's so interesting. Really, last week, the studio launched a range of textiles, carpets and other textiles with designer Nanny Markina. And the criteria were not visual criteria, but ethical criteria. I mean, they were basically no bleach, no dye, locally sourced, hand spun. That was the core premise of the design. Not one journalist reported on that. Not one. It was all, ooh, nice collection of fluffy rugs. And I'm sorry, that's not acceptable. It's very hard to do that over 2 years of a process of production, and it was chosen because that was the ethical criteria that would create the least damage to the environment and the makers. We have to start recording things responsibly.
It's important, it was a Spanish company. It's not a very company that has huge capital, but quite responsible. And as Ilse mentioned, it's kind of a little disappointed that, that none of the journalists cannot. They don't see that. The collection was called Well-being, but they don't really kind of a.
Yeah, the label.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very, very clearly communicated.
Yeah, and they come and touch. Yeah, but because they only go for the very kind of superficial. It looks nice, and they kind of move on and they take a nice picture. But hardly any one of them. And the company went in huge efforts. We get them, and we really kind of we're very persistent that those 4 criteria will be met, and they really had to go from Afghanistan to Pakistan to India and back and forth and collecting and all this, just to make sure that the criteria was across the collection. There were 9 products, and that's not so easy sometimes to understand those and trying to stick to that.
Yeah, so I think designers obviously need ethics, but I think our whole society needs to be held accountable, more accountable, and we need to push for that.
You spoke of the need of systems before. You also said that institutions, and well, in the text of Being Well, you say our institutionalized approach to life and death too often distances us from common sense and understanding of what matters. On the brink of automation, restoring human value and illness and wellness is a matter of a critical importance. How do the institutions, if you as a designer go work with institutions, how do they often respond to that voice of the designer?
It's a very interesting question, because we've recently had experience of working with 2 so-called social projects. One run by an NGO, Food for Soul, which is an Italian NGO run by Massimo Botero and his wife, Laura Gilmore, and they have set up a number, ever expanding, of soup kitchens, which are based on existing facilities, but they then turn them into community kitchens using food surplus from supermarkets, design and chefs to animate them and create dignity around the table. That's basically their brief. We worked on one in London, and our brief was to make it beautiful. It was one that had been grab and go, and it became a place where people hung out for hours, and got to know each other, created a bond between the people, and because it was beautiful, in the evening it gets hired by corporates and puts money in the till. The budget for that was minute. I mean, it was £30,000, which is really nothing for a space of that type. But with that brief, we were able to get support donations. On the other hand, I worked on a project which was more institutional. Can't name it, unfortunately. But our budget was...
Why not?
I just can't. I'll be kneecapped. No, it's not right either. It's not fair. It's not even that. But it's a mental health foundation. They do their best. That's why I can't name it. They do their best. But Oscar calculated that our budget at the end was 0.0625% of the total budget for the interior, because the building, the facade, the mismanagement, the fragmentation, the endless cost controls that cost so much money there was no money left to control. I mean, you get the picture. And underneath all of that, I think, is the lack of faith in design as being important for that kind of facility. And in fact, at the very beginning, the CEO mentioned that she felt a bit funny about hiring a designer because it's poor people and they might think that design was a waste of money. And we felt that all the way through the 3-year process. And we fought and we hung on and we communicated and we built bridges between the lack of money and the ambition. And actually, in the end, I have to say it's pretty good. With no money, I think we've done, well, no money, but really a tiny amount of money, we've done very well. And now the project manager admits that he made a mistake. But we've had to pay for it, essentially. We've picked up the ambition for that to be a more humane place and not just end up with institutional lighting, flooring, fragmented decisions. So, yeah, you need a champion, you need someone who cares, but you need vision and the idea that design can make a difference.
And you need I always say that design is about kind of having stamina, kind of like a sportsman. I think you need to practice a lot, and it's like I always say, it's like a muscle. You exercise it, but you need to kind of really have a lot of stamina.
And you need to be able to create trust, because the biggest problem I think in the one that cannot be named is risk. They're so risk averse, and it's understandable. You have a board and then another board and people, none of whom want to take a risk. And basically, as I'm sure all of you are aware, when you build in that context, 100% of the money goes to the contractor to carry the risk. Money just gets lost. And I understand, you need to protect yourself against the roof falling down or the lighting not working, but do you really need to protect yourself against the linoleum or the carpet tile? In the end, basically, the bottom line is that everything costs, twice as much money, and none of that goes to the end user.
And as I always have said that trust equals risk, and you can do kind of a mathematical calculation, and always it works. So I always recommend to the students or the young designers, I think the first thing is how can you create trust with the people that maybe they hire you or the people that are working, because if they trust you, they allow you to make things.
Somehow have to take design and the sort of element that is people-facing away from construction. I think there needs to be a point where that's ring-fenced as being the thing that affects the user, as opposed to the thing that is going to be built and is, understandably, the bit that needs to be insured and carefully protected.
Now we're talking about also very specifically about a place and designing from within a place connected to institutions. That is for me a nice bridge to go to the theme local authority. I would read the text real quick from local authority. Globalization imposes systems that homogenize with little regard for the local culture or characteristics. The balance is beginning to be restored. People and communities are empowering themselves with solutions that are relevant to their own specific context.
Goes back to trust, actually.
Yeah.
Trusting that people know themselves better than the experts, and that your role as a designer is to facilitate that.
Yeah, I think maybe in this case also, I believe that not always design is about starting from a white piece of paper and start making the drawing or something. Sometimes it's about maybe kind of being in the middle, working with many different people, almost kind of like if you bring all these experts or all these people into a room and you take your hat off, everyone removes the profession outside, and maybe the designer helps them maybe organize, visualize, then show them, or maybe not show them some of the tools and methods that we as designers use, like I would say visualization. I think visualization probably for me is the most powerful thing that designers are always quite fascinated when you're working with someone that is not a designer, they see a designer drawing, and they start talking, I'm thinking about making something maybe that could do this, and the designer quickly makes a little sketch, and they say, wow, you're an artist. And that ability to convert, really, to translate kind of words into a little image I think I would say it's one of the most powerful things. And of course, today we have more tools like computers, 3D printing, all the. But to me, the idea to be able to convert a word into an image that people say, imagine. I think one of the things I bring is, maybe one of the things that we learned when we were at Philips is that we did a lot of work in what we call memories of the future. There's something for Stefano. And we did a lot of work in that, and that's what we did a lot of create memories of the future. And I think that's one of the abilities that we as designers are kind of trained to put that on. And people find that quite fascinating.
And with regard to local authority, working within a place and listening within a place, you frame that as a response to globalization. So that, right? That's.
Well, if you look at the projects that are around us, when you have Simón Ballen, you have with his glass project where he worked with a gold mine in Colombia, but taking the waste and then creating the possibility for them to make glass, but didn't do it for them, gave them the tools and the guidance, all behind Clémence with her water catcher, which was inspired by people in rural South Africa. I mean, Oscar,
you have from Luke from he went to Nepal about the garbage collection, and he designed, or maybe helped them organize, but it was more getting the people together. Say, we can do this kind of activities. Maybe we can have bags that are in different colors. Maybe we can have a little trolley. We can start thinking about how we can this. I think maybe it's also in a sense that not always. I'm a great believer that revolutions have to happen in the periphery. If a revolution can never happen in the center because there's too much traffic. So you need these kind of small actions on the outside, and then people say, oh, look how they do it down there. Maybe we can do that ourselves too. But then you need to kind of, again, the designer facilitate and maybe also visualize it. And I think
the designer as observer, designer as researcher, designer as interrogator. They're not always coming up with the answers, but they're sometimes very good at seeing what's out there and making sense of that, communicating that, and moving them forward.
Small actions. I think it's important to understand and to recognize that they're as valuable as maybe other big actions. And I think that maybe those are the ones that maybe allows you to, well, you are also more kind of hands-on because you have to maybe deal with every day.
And small isn't necessarily small today. I mean, look at Greta Thunberg. Look how fast that moved. Today a small action can be as big as a big action, and in fact it possibly has more traction because of technology. So I think we've also got to get over the idea that, there's top down and ground up. I think they're just different. They're scalable in different ways.
Is that what this whole exhibition is about?
You've got it. I think that designers have huge power. It's not supposed to be defining hope, but I find hope very interesting as an idea today. Henry Ford said something along the lines of, either you think you can, or you think you can't, and you're both right.
But also I think it's about, design is about thinking that something is going to happen. And in some ways also, I think that's a nice feeling. I think that we as designers are trying to always to think in a way that what if we do it like this, or what if we do it like this? And I think that's kind of a very healthy and very, I think it's a nice feeling.
And I guess structurally working with students every week or every year, you might get a lot of really fresh input from them.
I've been teaching for 23 years at the Academy, and for me it's been very rewarding, but I think being in touch with young people, I think keeps you really, keeps you alert.
Right.
It's open minds.
Yeah.
I think that's what's so great, is to work with people who have open minds, because, a lot of the rest of my life I'm working with people who have sometimes rather closed minds, and you're having to prise the door open, or they're just anxious, they're anxious about time and money and accountability and so on. Students don't have any of the above, and that's so refreshing.
So they challenge you and...
they think you're bullshitting, they'll tell you.
But it's quite fascinating that suddenly if you have
Well, they look at you weirdly, which is
a graduation where you have 20 projects, 10 students, 2 projects is 20, and there are teams from healthcare, from mines, from electronics, from pet, from solar energy, for something about the rain. So you have to listen for half an hour and try to be very objective and try to give some feedback. So I think it gives you. It's good for the Alzheimer's or something. No, but it keeps your mind agile. So, and I think that's very, it's just, but it's also very rewarding to see also what they come up and when they present this what if. And some of them, the what ifs are really fascinating and really kind of say, wow, it's so nice to see that, such a great satisfaction, especially when you see it then in the graduation shows and some of them become small companies that are entrepreneurs, and I don't know what's...
And building. I think that's obviously something about being a teacher that's great, is how to see an individual and figure out what it is about them that's special and helping them build the strength of that. I don't ever see really our job as being teachers in that sense. I think it's about coaching and building and confronting and strengthening an individual's position and skill set, obviously. They have to learn to ride the bicycle, but then it's really what their position is and how can they be outspoken about it. And I think that's a really interesting journey to go on with somebody.
I always have said, at least in my department with the teacher, our first slide was always that we don't teach design. I think you must learn by doing it.
And what have you learned from composing this exhibition? Last question. After this question, we will have questions.
We'll continue learning. I think we really like that there is learning, and so seeing them together, I think also gives you a very, it's a really good feeling that there's so many different ideas from so many different topics that kind of refresh your mind and say, oh, it's not. But again, as Ilse mentioned, they are just starting points, kind of the seeds. And I always say I think as a designer, you have to be like a gardener. If you take care of the garden, some gardens really grow, and you have to give them water and open the window, the sun, and take care of the bad things that sometimes run around it. So you really need to be kind of a good gardener. And I would say these are kind of really potential seeds.
And I would say trust. I really believe in the people that come from the school. I have put full trust also in the people who have helped me put this show together. And that is such a great feeling to watch it happen. We're in London. They've done it for us. So really, full credit to them. It's the people in the show, it's the people who helped put the show together. And they're a great group of people, so thank you.
So, thank you for the attention. Now it's up to you to ask some questions. I guess there might be a lot of... Please raise your hand if you have a burning question. Yes? Hold it straight in front of your face.
Thank you. Ilse, I'd like to ask you, because you were talking about Food for Soul with the budget of £30,000 and the other project that you can't name, which ended up with 0.06% or whatever. You're a businesswoman. If you know that beforehand, would you have taken on the project, or would you have... Are you as much in it for the adventure, or is it all...
I don't know about adventure, but for sure, as a studio, we're very committed to balancing out the projects that keep the studio going financially and the ones that we do because we really think we should. And so both of those fit into that category, that we want to bring the skills that we've learned to that category. And certainly we also want to try to work with the teams to figure out how maybe it could be done better in the future with other projects, not necessarily ours. And it is rewarding. You get a different kind of reward. I asked one of the clients at the soup kitchen, at the community kitchen, whether he thought it was all a bit overcooked, so to speak. And he said, the fact that it's beautiful shows that someone cares. So yeah, you get other sorts of rewards.
We have a next question over here.
Hello, thank you for your for sharing your experience. I have one question. What do you think about the term nudge? Because you mentioned hope, and all these projects that are around us, they create like a friendly reminder that we can have a better hope for the future whatsoever. But if something really doesn't affect us personally, socially, economically, or even to our loved ones, we don't do anything about it. So the question is, what is missing here so that we as citizens, we can be able to contribute?
That's a very good question. And obviously you actually know the answer yourself. What do you think is missing?
I will reply by asking you, do you think nudge is necessary?
But, sorry, define that.
What's nudge?
That's a good question. Well, in the 90s, a Dutch economist was studying at Boston, and there was a huge disaster in the men's toilet rooms in Amsterdam airport. So he decided to place a small fly on the toilet rooms so that we as men, we can have a target when we are peeing. And then he coined that change of behavior without noticing.
Nudge, yeah, right, yes.
Nudge. And yeah, so do you think that we will need some sort of nudge so that we can change our behavior without being affected personally?
I think that it's both, isn't it? I think people need to feel engaged. I mean, certainly my experience with the projects we do in the studios, we work incredibly hard with engaging. We don't just throw an idea over the wall, never. We talk, we listen, we watch, we hang out with before we do anything. But I think that is the power of design, is that you can make something that can change behavior. So, going back to Food for Soul, that in a way was a nudge. Because in the end, all we did was make something that felt more human, that treated them as human beings. It wasn't a big expense. The building was there. It was a relatively light intervention, but it changed everything, and it made them behave differently. When I say them, I'm not talking about the clients. I'm talking about the people who ran it. They initially said, oh, forget about it, table service, you've got to be joking. People don't want it. Of course they do. Everybody wants to be treated differently, and that's a small shift that changed everything. So I think it's a combination, and I think design can, not always, but it can make those small interventions that change behavior.
I think
Was that a set?
I think it's good to have a target. Yeah, depends if you're a hunter or probably it's a target. No, in a sense that maybe if I look at design and research, I remember when my first time I went in 1987. They took me to the research laboratories in Philips, and there's a big sign there in stone, and someone translated for me. They say, research cannot be linked to any commercial activity, which means has to be kind of open-ended. And I had a chance to walk and looking at some of the scientists and working, and someone said, wow, what do these guys do here? Because no, we work in optics, we work in voice recognition, we work in material this and that, and there's not, maybe something they can do for 10 years and maybe something will come out or maybe not. And I knew that later on, after like 10, 15, in the 2000s, I think, when the business became, or the economy became tougher, a lot of fields changed completely, that research laboratories really they were linked to the business, and they're given more business target because they say, no, we cannot. I think fields, every business has to, like 10% will go to research, and they just continue doing open-ended things like this, and they have to be they have to have a target. Maybe we as designers in some way, I believe that it's good to have, like, if we're going to do a project or whatever, that is going to be introduced in 2 years or something. I personally prefer that. I know, let's say Milan. A lot of the things we do, not always, but a lot of projects, is Milan is where the things are introduced, or New York or something. And I think in some way for me it's kind of something that you aim at. And I think it's because that gives you a sense that maybe you have to finish it. Kind of, I don't know, that you had to, it has to be something kind of concrete, cannot be always ending. I don't know, for me it gives me that satisfaction personally, that it can always continue, of course.
But you're talking about small shifts, aren't you, especially? And I think, for example, thinking about the projects outside, I think René's maps for cancer care are a really good example, where in the end, it's a map of a radiotherapy centre. It's a small thing. But just by changing the language, by changing the communication around how you navigate a building that is frankly terrifying, by being humorous about something that you're not actually, if you're in the medical side of things, supposed to be humorous about. So, you know, drawings of people with slightly saggy tits going into machines and knowing what's on in the rooms. Apparently, it changed the amount of time that doctors had to spend with their patients, because patients could bear to look at it. You know, it was, and I think there's tiny changes, understanding how people feel and nudging that communication can make a huge difference. Not all changes need to be big. I think you can achieve a lot with small changes.
Was that an answer to your question?
Maybe. Or maybe not.
I think so. We have a next question here from Simón. Simón is one of the designers present, and his work is shown over there at the wall.
Maybe my question relates to the last question, and especially to this room about local authorities when you speak about that designers are facilitators. Then I question a little bit the role of authorship, because in the Design Academy we've been always taught to design from yourself, and what's the role of authorship? And with that question I also ask if selflessness is also a tool that gives space for hope.
It's interesting. I suspect that's, again, a set of values that's changing in society. I had a chat with a guy who runs a finance group in Stockholm, and we were talking about the values that he looked for in people that joined his firm. And, you know, I was expecting kind of go-getting or, you know, the usual kind of clever, you know. And he said, no, he looks for people who have care, humility, tenacity, passion, curiosity, intelligence, sure, but none of those were values that you would necessarily have historically associated with that sector. So I think in society in general, we need to stop just thinking about ourselves and think about our neighbours.
Also, you mentioned sports.
Oh yeah, his final conclusion was that when he looked for people, his ideal employee would be a sports person from a small town, at which point he looked at his wife and said, "You came from a small town."
She didn't like that very much.
But yeah, you know, I think the model of what we should be, I think, has to change. You know, there's a 20th century, capitalistic, neoliberal vision, isn't there, still lingering on, and I think that's obviously changing fast,
but maybe
and will change faster.
Has to be moved to more kind of the chair owners. But on the other hand, no, if you look on the other side, if you look at communications today, how press, as soon as you put 10 names on a project, it's not so interested. They only want to see one name. And that's kind of how, on the one hand, we want to share, look, all these people participated in the project. On the other hand, you talk to journalists, if you say, 10 people work, and they say, no, what is your name? They only want to have one name, because they say, people only remember one name. So it's kind of becomes a paradox.
But it's not true entirely, because I think that is absolutely changing. I mean, Assemble, a couple of years ago, won the Turner Prize, Ambitions here. It is changing, and I hope it changes fast.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope.
Yeah, hello, Elsa and Oscar, thank you for sharing your experience. There were two questions that I would like to ask. One was about ethics. How do you measure ethics? Because I think that's more of a personal thing on, you know, what I think is ethical might be totally different than what someone else thinks is ethical. So my first question basically is you having experienced in the journey that you've been through in the world as a teacher, as a student of life, as an artist and designer, and as an entrepreneur and someone that owns a company, my first question would be, how do you define something that's ethical? You know, and my second question would also, well, the first one, of course.
Yeah, huge question.
Well, it's a big question.
And
because I
we've
think it's
absolutely
personal.
got to be careful about imposing, you know, one world's ethics on another, obviously.
Exactly.
But having said that, I think there are basic humane and environmental ethics that I think are more clear-cut. So our position in those is obviously going to be subjective, but I think there are broader. There are some that unify us, and there are others that are more local. But I think at the moment they're not even discussed. I mean, how often when you go to a client is ethics ever on the table? And the first place to start is with that discussion, I think, to figure it out between you.
But I think it's more of a personal approach, because that's something that comes to mind for me in any business transaction. Ethics and my values and integrity is always first and foremost on the table. But not everyone thinks like me.
No, they really don't.
or you. So my question is, how do you implement that? And then it goes to my second question, because you speak more or less, you know, as a teacher myself, it's about the coaching and the mentoring in any business, and it's about the self-awareness of what I'm hearing. It's a little bit on the edge of also counseling. How do you implement that? Because that's also a mindset. You know, how I see the world and whether it's positive or negative, or how you and your husband, whether you're, you know, in anything that you do, how do we, or as you, the question is for you, implement that, and how do you transcend it to the next person to understand your way of thinking, and how does your business
as you say, it's
for your clients?
I think it's implementing is the wrong word. I think, as you say, it's a negotiation, it's a counselling, it's a conversation, but I think it's really important to understand it's an imperfect science, but it needs to be on the table, because it's really not on the table at the moment in most cases. You know, in the project that can't be named, the project manager at one point said, literally in a meeting, well, the interior design is nice to have, but not need to have, is it? And this is a family mental health centre. And, you know, I either just step down and sort of sit meekly there, or just say, you can't be serious. You know, ethically, how can you say that?
Well, that's knowing your clients. That's why I said the word implement. That's more a business
term.
It's a
negotiation at all points, and you have to call people out. And maybe there's a separate, maybe then that's a discussion around, obviously, issues that create those ethical holes, because it is a black hole. But you have to, I think, constantly negotiate that. Absolutely. It needs to be on the table. There isn't a rule book, but it needs to be out there. And there are some things that I think are clearly, clearly black and white, and others that are less so.
Yeah. Well, no, I don't want to go on, and I'll leave this at the last, but my question is,
how do
you apply it to your clients? Like the company you can't name. They say, listen, this is not for me. And you're saying not only is it about your well-being, because I did my due diligence on you and what you promote, and about awareness, how do you as a company from what you stand for go and change your client's mind? That's implication. How do you implement it?
You have to stand up for it, and you have to be prepared to walk away. Simply put.
That's what I'm asking.
And, you know, it's not that I have...
integrity.
I mean, it is ultimately about integrity. You have to be able to walk away. And, I mean, you know, that is a choice. And it's not necessarily that I have deep pockets at all. But I've always thought that being a barmaid would be okay. I don't have a problem with that if everything went wrong. You know, I've been that in my life. I think ultimately you have to know your own line and what you can't cross.
I think also maybe we try to, to do good research maybe on who we work for or who we may work with. So, but again, at the end also comes about kind of trust but things can change. Some clients that they start at the beginning like amazing, and suddenly in the middle, when maybe finances come or things change during our projects takes 2 or 3 years, and maybe the first year everything great, and the second year things change. So it's
you can't do it on your own,
yeah.
but you have to start there, I think. But I think that societally there need to be more ethical codes of practice. I think it should be more familiar in every walk of life that those are things that we process, go through, understand. Also the other way, we need to know what is the ethical standpoint of the companies that we're working with. There needs to be more transparency, obviously. So it's a more complex story, but in order to negotiate and navigate that, I think more transparency is really important.
You're also dealing with individuals that work for companies, represent companies, and sometimes they also have different views. And
trust me, I know. I mean, I'm a big true believer on giving trust, but there are certain times I also learn I'm a giver. I believe the trust should be given. However, I also believe the trust should also be earned.
And taken away.
Exactly.
That point,
So,
yeah.
finding your own,
It's
balance
tough.
on how do you execute that, whether it's in daily life, whether it's being a teacher, whether it's your business, whether it's your integrity and what you stand for in your ethics, or the company you work with. I find that also because trust, once again, respect are the ground, grassroots, the seed to the apple of anything that you do for me.
I agree. It's hard in the commercial world, obviously, but I think we all have to push hard for that. I think that you will get a much better outcome.
Yeah, just positive feedback. I'm a woman of feedback.
And it's funny, I mean, I did my ethical screening on my pension. It was 10 years ago. And I was nervous about it, but it was partly because I thought I cannot be head of man and well-being and not do this. I can't have one rule for my work and another for my finances. So I found one of the few companies in London that actually did it at the time, and went through my endless pages of where did I stand on pornography and what have you. And at the end, I mean, it wasn't a big company, so I think they had something like 3,000 companies that they had screened themselves and thought were sound. And after I'd done my screening, I think I had 7 left. Anyway, and I said, well, look, let's just do the really hardcore screening and see where we go, because I can always become less ethical if I have to. And you know what? It did fine. It wasn't amazing, but it was, B plus in brackets. It was fine. And I haven't touched it. So I think, you have to start somewhere. Yeah, you have to start somewhere.
Thank you for your addition to this evening. We have to round up, so now we're going to take some baby steps to the bar, I guess. I would thank you very much for being here tonight, being with us, and having your attention. Thank you, Ilse. Thank you, Oscar. Can I please get one big, warm, hopeful... Annemoon?
Thank you, Axel. Did a great job. Yes. Well, I hope this gives you all some hope. And that's heel flauw. But shall we go to the bar and talk a little bit further? And hope to see you all again. We're here each Thursday between 5 and 7 for the Innovation Cafe. And we're here, of course, every day to bring the different meanings of design to you and to all the other people. Thank you. Oh, there's my hope.
Just wanted to let you know that after this talk, after you're all left for the bar, we're going to change this so it's all set up the way it's supposed to be. So you can have a look on how it was meant by Ilse and Oscar. So, thanks.